Let me just read it the way I wrote it. The chief responsibility of fathers is to partner in the development of a culture that creates an atmosphere that permits an expression equal to both your story and your hunger. Let me read that again. The chief responsibility of fathers is to partner in the development of a culture that creates an atmosphere that permits an expression equal to both your story and your hunger. You came here because you despised the restrictions of religion. Came here because you despised the restrictions of religion. Now comes the responsibility of inheriting an environment without those religious restrictions. Make sure you discard the cage before you get here. Don't carry restrictive paradigms into environments of unprecedented liberty. The danger of this environment is that the excuses are no longer permissible. And I like to tell people concerning an environment like this, either completely get in it or absolutely stay away from it. Because most people say this, I go to a church where they just won't let me be me, or they won't let me worship the way I want to worship. Well, you're not there anymore. So you need to now be cautious when a prophetic decree comes out of the worship expression. It's funny, our bulb blew in the projector. They sent me that text message this morning. Blood blew. My first thought was, what are we using that thing for? When's the last time anybody knew the words they were going to sing before they sang them, that we could actually put them up on the wall and all sing along? It's all this prophetic spontaneity. Out of that prophetic spontaneity, you are now not just singing songs written to the Lord, which is powerful, incredible, and awesome, and we will continue to do that. But now you have a responsibility to respond to the prophetic decree coming out of spontaneous worship. So when you hear, what would it look like if every box was broken? You then have to realize there's a grace present within that declaration that creates a responsibility. Once grace comes, I don't have to make anything happen. But I do have to yield to the grace present through the prophetic decree. What would it look like if every box was broken was not to create in you a wondering as to what it would look like if every box was broken. It's to say, now it's permissible for every box to be broken. And what happens if you and I cannot in a moment recognize the grace present within the prophetic decree, it actually becomes dangerous, because to whom much is given, much is required. And if you spent, possibly for many of you, decades inside the religious restriction that judged anybody that let their box be broken, you can carry that paradigm. And I saw it by the Spirit like this. I saw it like the people who travel with their dogs because they think their dogs are people. You know, the people who, if Aunt Sally died, they wouldn't cry, but if Peppy died, they'd have to go on, kind of thing. Let me say something to you. That is a perverted affection. Okay, it's an animal. All dogs don't go to heaven. I'm sorry, I don't care what the movie said. It's an animal. But you see these people, I'm walking in hotels and I'm like, this is a very expensive, affluent, nice hotel. And somebody's walking in with, got their dog in the kennel. And the dog's not thinking it's living in the lap of luxury. You can tie a pink bow around its neck anyway. You're still carrying it around in a cage. The dog was actually made to. Not people who drive and smoke and got their dog in their lap, but thank God they're not texting. I'm like, run them off the road too, you know. So this. And what happens for many of us is we've now been adopted. We've now found family. We've now been brought out of that system, but we're so used to functioning in that cage of restriction that when a prophetic decree comes with grace for opportunity for breakthrough, what would it look like if every box was broken? Then I look around the room and a half a dozen people are breaking their boxes. And I'm going, no, that's exactly what you came here for, is to be free from the constriction of religion, but you can be trained in restriction for so long that when liberty comes, you miss the opportunity present within that decree. And I think at the end we were able to recover some of that. We're able to re-engage on some of that. But I want us to be acutely aware. Let me say it like this. I want us to be so prophetically trained that when that decree comes forth out of that, something hits us not as, oh, I like that song and that's great to worship along to. Something says, now's the moment for you to break your box. And you'll never know the box is broken until you see the religious spirit offended. Okay, the mark of the broken box in the scripture was the offense of the spirit of religion. Bill Johnson says that sacrifice is 1 degree beyond convenience. So what happens oftentimes for many of us is we get in this expression of worship that we're comfortable with or that we're accustomed to, and then another opportunity for breakthrough comes. We miss that opportunity because we treat this environment the way we treated other environments. There's a carryover. Even though you've exchanged environments, have you fully exchanged mentalities? Come on, I want you to say this because I want you to hear what I'm saying. Even if we changed environments, did we fully discard the paradigm that was present in a previous environment? If you did, then I'm going to tell you, when I've visited and traveled places where there were great authentic moves of God, 100% of the time the religious thing in me was offended. 100% of the time. Many of you that love listening to the podcast and music coming out of Bethel would hate the church service because it's some of the most maddening people dancing around in wedding dresses and waving flags and taping $100 bills all over themselves to prophetically decree that they're going to have financial break. And God bless them, do whatever you want to do. But I'm telling you, this is what people want. People want the teaching of this. They want the sound of this, but they're not surrendering to the environment that all of that necessitates, which is broken boxes. And I'm telling you, some of you are still trapped in your cage. You still can go a little bit this way, a little bit that way, and you can go here. And when Yahweh says, what would it look like if every box was broken? That means it's not going to look the way it looked before every box was broken. And as the sound transitions, let me say this, as the sound is promoted, as we graduate into a more authentic sound, we must respond with a more authentic worship. For years here, I say for years before revival, and then for a short period of time after revival, I felt like the sound needed to catch up to the expression of everything else the Lord was doing. That's not on anybody else, it's just that this place had been permeated for years with an antiquated sound. So this new sound comes, this new move of the Spirit comes, and we would get real close to breakthrough in sound, and then it would kind of come back, and then we'd get real close, and then we'd have moments of breakthrough in sound. Something shifted one night. Johnson and Sharon, I think, were at a wedding, and they came in late. And he comes in the building with this look in his eyes, and he's sitting there and he can't hardly talk and he's stuttering. I'll never forget the look on your face. When I was coming through the parking lot, I heard a sound literally hit us like a wave. And I knew then, that we were on, people respond to the podcast because they're hearing something they've not heard before. It's different. It's a different language. There's different grace. There's another degree of permission. There is revelation and understanding, and I understand all of that. What happens within this sound is the sound is not simply to stimulate you. It carries an announcement of the availability of another dimension. The sound being promoted carries within it the announcement of the current availability of another dimension. What you do not do in that moment is simply get caught up in the sound. You see the sound as the announcement of the availability of another dimension. When you respond appropriately to that, do you know what you access? Another dimension. Let me say it like this. You're not to become the fan of the sound. It does not encourage me that so many people listen to these podcasts. It encourages me that people are being transformed who are listening to the podcast. And I recognize most people listening are not being transformed. Many people are just listening because they like to listen. When that sound comes in this room, make sure you're not listening because you like to listen. Make sure you're being transformed by the sound. Because when that came today, there could have been, I'm not necessarily trying to rebuke as much as I'm trying to teach, but take it how you will. When that sound comes in the room, you and I then have a responsibility. Check out of what you've been dealing with all week. Check out of what you're going through personally. Check out of the emotional struggles you may be having. Check out of the personality that you may have married yourself to, and come into the room and hear the prophetic decree as an announcement. There's another dimension available by way of the broken box. Let's break our box. Is that good? Is that helpful? What would it look like if every box was broken? I'm going to tell you, we still don't know. But he's been asking us about that for a year. I think that came at Bren's last year, didn't it? So for a year, maybe he wants to actually see what it would look like if every box was broken. Not me be stimulated by Paige's box being broken. So again, there's chief responsibility of fathers is to partner in the development of a culture that creates an atmosphere that permits an expression equal to both your story and your hunger. Permits an expression equal to both your story and your hunger. You came here because you despised the restrictions of religion. Now comes the responsibility of inheriting an environment without those religious restrictions. Make sure you discard your cage before you get here. Don't carry restrictive paradigms into environments of unprecedented liberty. I think we have an environment of unprecedented liberty. Make sure you don't carry the paradigm of religious restriction into that atmosphere of unprecedented liberty. The danger of this environment is excuses are no longer permitted. Many people will stay in the religious system because it facilitates the excuse for ongoing dysfunction. And I have met numerous people. I'm going to Luke 15, I really am. I've met numerous people over the years that have made the statement to me, I avoided coming there because I knew if I ever did, God would tell me to move. Right? I knew if I ever came there. And in essence, you know what they're saying? I knew the only excuse I still had was I've never personally encountered that environment. Once you've personally encountered that environment, there are no more excuses. And it doesn't mean everybody's supposed to move here. Hear me, I've never asked anybody to move here. I've tried to keep several people to stay away. I'm thinking about sending some of them with Mark right now. I don't know. I love him too much to do that to him. So, Luke 15. I actually love Destiny, and she'd have to deal with it more than Mark. Mark could just go in there and pray. Luke 15, verse 1. Many dishonest tax collectors and other notorious sinners often gathered around to listen as Jesus taught the people. This raised concerns with the Jewish religious leaders and experts of the law. Indignant, they grumbled and complained, saying, look at how this man associates with all these notorious sinners and welcomes them all to come to him. In response, Jesus gave them this illustration. Who's them? They're identified. Dishonest tax collectors and notorious sinners are gathered. Okay? You got this? To listen as Jesus taught the people. This raised concerns within the Jewish religious leaders and experts of the law. In response, Jesus gave them this illustration. Who? Jewish religious leaders and experts in the law. Okay, so there are two crowds of people. One is identified as dishonest tax collectors, two as notorious sinners. One dishonest tax collectors and notorious sinners. The second group is Jewish leaders and experts in the law. All right, Jesus is responding to the Jewish leaders and the experts in the law by saying there once was a shepherd with 100 lambs. One of his lambs wandered away and was lost. Say lost. So the shepherd left the 99 lambs out in the open field and searched in the wilderness for the one lost lamb. He didn't stop until he finally found it. With exuberant joy, he raised it up, placed it on his shoulders, carrying it back with cheerful delight. Returning home, say home. He called his friends and neighbors together and said, let's have a party. Come and celebrate with me the return of my lost lamb. It wandered away, but I found it and brought it home. Say home. Jesus continued in the same way. There'll be a glorious celebration in heaven over the rescue of one lost sinner who repents, comes back home. Repents, comes back home, and returns to the fold more so than for all the righteous people who ever strayed away. I'm going to back up here and I want to show you something that's been fascinating to me. Verse 7, Jesus continued in the same way. There'll be a glorious celebration in heaven over the rescue of one lost sinner who repents, comes back home, and returns to the fold. I want to change your definition of lost. And I think if I can change your definition of lost, I can change your definition of home. Rejoice more so than for all the religious people who never strayed away. Now, you remember who he's talking to? Just jab. That's just a good straight left jab to the mouth, to the Jewish religious leaders, and to the experts in the law, okay? Jesus gave them another parable, still talking to the same group. Once was a woman who had 10 valuable silver coins. When she lost one of them, she swept her entire house diligently, searching every corner of her house for that one lost coin. So it says she lost one of them, and it identifies the coin at the B clause of verse 8 as lost. One lost coin. When she finally found it, she gathered all her friends and neighbors for a celebration, telling them, come and celebrate with me. I had lost my precious silver coin. Who did the coin belong to? Who did the coin belong to? Her. Change your definition of lost. Who did the coin belong to? Who did the sheep belong to? You got to change your definition of lost. If we can change your definition of lost, we can change your definition of saved. If we can change your definition of saved, we can change your definition of home. Okay. God responds every time one lost sinner repents and turns to him. He says to all of the angels, let's have a joyous celebration for the one who was lost I have found. Verse 11, very familiar to us. Jesus said, once there was a father with 2 sons. The younger son came to his father and said, Father, don't you think it's time to give me the share of your estate that belongs to me? So the father went ahead and distributed among the 2 sons their inheritance. Shortly afterward, the younger son packed up all of his belongings, traveled off to see the world. He journeyed to a far-off land where he soon wasted all he was giving in a binge of extravagant and reckless living. With everything spent and nothing left, he grew hungry, for there was a severe famine in the land. So he begged a farmer in that country to hire him. The farmer hired him and sent him out to feed the pigs. The son was famished. He was willing to even eat the slop given to the pigs because no one would feed him a thing. Humiliated, the son finally realized what he was doing, and he thought, there are many workers at my father's house who have all the food that they want with plenty to spare. They lack nothing. Why am I here dying of hunger, feeding these pigs and eating their slop? I want to go back home. Come on, say home. I want to go back home to my father's house, and I'll say to him, Father, I was wrong. I have sinned against you. I'll never be worthy to be called your son. Please, Father, just treat me like one of your employees. So the younger son set off for home. Younger son set off for home. From a long distance away, his father saw him coming, dressed as a beggar. Great compassion swelled up in his heart for his son who was returning home. Son was returning home. So the father raced out to meet him. He swept him up in his arms, hugged him dearly, kissed him over and over with tender love. Then the son said, Father, I was wrong. I have sinned against you. I could not deserve to be called your son. Just let me be. The father interrupted and said, Son, you're home now. Son, you're home now. Turning to his servants, the father said, quick, bring me the best robe, my very own robe, and I'll place it on his shoulders. Bring me the ring, the seal of sonship. I will put it on his finger. Bring out the best shoes you can find for my son. Let's prepare a great feast and celebrate. For this beloved son of mine was once dead, but now he's alive again. Was he ever dead? Or was he dead because he wasn't home? Okay, let's go a little bit further. Prepare a great feast and celebrate. This beloved son of mine was once dead, but now he's alive again. Once he was lost, but now he's found. Everyone celebrated with overflowing joy. Now the older son was out working in the field when his brother returned. As he approached the house, he heard the music of celebration and dancing. So he called over one of his servants and asked, what's going on now? The servant replied, it's your younger brother. He returned home, and your father is throwing a party to celebrate his homecoming. Elder son became angry and refused to go in to celebrate, so his father came and pleaded with him, come and enjoy the feast with us. The son said, Father, listen, how many years have I been working like a slave for you? Remember who he's talking to. How many years have I been working like a slave for you, performing every duty you've asked as a faithful son? Working like a slave, performing every duty. Remember who he's talking to. And I've never once disobeyed you. Never at any time did I transgress your command. Some of you are familiar with the old language that would have been used there. But you've never thrown a party for me because of my faithfulness. Never once have you given me a goat that I could feast and celebrate with my friends like he's doing now. But look, this son of yours, he comes back after wasting your wealth on prostitutes and reckless living. And here you are throwing a great feast to celebrate for him. The father said, my son, you are always with me, by my side. Everything I have is yours. It's only right to celebrate like this and be overjoyed, because this brother of yours who was once dead and gone, but now is alive and back with us again. He was lost, but now he is found. Now, what's been happening to me, and I'm gonna personalize this some, because I'm thinking sometimes maybe leadership is the Lord letting you experience something a nanosecond before everybody else. Not just me, but I mean all of us in leading this. Maybe the Lord's letting you experience some things early. And what's happening to me is I am returning to extremely familiar passages of Scripture, many that I have put to memorization over the years. Most all of them that I've preached from numerous times. And Yahweh is asking me to look again now through the lens of righteousness. That before I began to get rooted in the revelation of righteousness, I was for years before revival moved by a justice consciousness rather than a righteous consciousness. In that narrative, the older brother has a justice consciousness. Before revival, when you're permitted to operate as a Pharisee, you will operate in extreme justice consciousness. What happened then, I preached, wrote about, taught from, read, memorized through an inferior set of lenses. So now I'm able to go back to probably the most preached from story throughout all of history and look at it through a different set of lenses. Now, I did that when I got in revival. I went back into Luke 15 and I looked at it through way of the grace and mercy I was inheriting in revival. I don't know, outside of encountering Yahweh in revival itself, if I've experienced anything personally as transformative as the revelation of righteousness. And that's why I kind of just want to teach that for the rest of my life. But as I'm looking at the story of one that we call the prodigal son, we get this. It's interesting where we get the term prodigal from. But the prodigal, if you were reading from the New King James, Jesus would say that he wasted his inheritance on prodigal living. But he never calls him a prodigal son. If you went into some of the original language, you would find that in essence what the older brother says when the son returns is that he is prodigal. Okay, so Jesus identifies the living as prodigal. The spirit in the older brother identifies the son as prodigal. There's a massive difference. Your behavior is not your identity. Okay, let me say it like this. Your issue is not your identity. Everybody has issues. If you let your issue identify you, then you'll never use your identity for what it's intended, which is to leverage you out of your issue. You don't get out of issues by becoming conscious of issues. You get out of issues by becoming conscious of righteousness. And then you begin to see the issue as a direct insult to the righteousness that is your identity. Okay, if you're struggling with secret sin or public sin this morning, focusing on rooting that sin out of your life will never bring the hoped for result. Never. I should have got lots of amens on that, but that means I still got some pretenders in the room. So what will bring you out of that is daring to believe what he said about you in the middle of that issue. And he uses the identity to leverage you out of the issue. He doesn't use the absence of the issue to leverage you into the identity. So he'll start to whisper things about you that are incongruent with the way you're actually living right now, because he's calling you up and out of that so he can seat you in this. I showed it to Matt when you began to make that prophetic decree this morning about a robe and a ring. I had just written in my notes with stars on each side about a robe and a ring. And that wasn't even really in accord with what other things were being declared, but it came out of the Spirit, which for me became the put your microphone on your head, you are speaking today kind of thing, how Yahweh does that. But what happens when we begin to deal with robe and righteousness, we begin to deal with identity. The robe of righteousness becomes the chief identificational point in the life of the believer. From that becomes grace for you to begin to believe in terms of authority. He gives him a robe, which symbolizes he's no longer the person that was in the pig pen. He's no longer the person that wasted the inheritance. That is why it is illegal today in a historic sense, in a philosophical sense, in a scriptural sense, in a doctrinal or theological sense. It's illegal to call that kid the prodigal son. His storyline is a redeemed heir. A matter of fact, if you go into If you go into Brian Simmons' heading, almost all headings will say the prodigal son right here. Right here above the beginning of, I can't see it because the letters are too small. Verse 11 of Luke 15, it will usually say the prodigal son. In Brian Simmons' translation, it says the loving father. Because you need to know what the story is about. Let me show you something that's really interesting. I found a footnote on this that I think is fascinating. I believe that the story of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son is a picture of the Trinity pursuing the restoration of that was lost. Okay? The shepherd is the Son, Jesus, going after the lost. Okay? The Holy Spirit is the light that illuminates the room that allows the coin to be found. Then the Father is on the porch watching for the Son to be restored. All of this picture is not just about a son. It's about how we see the Father. It's about how the story came to us. Can you identify with the prodigal son? Yes. Maybe in my life more so I can identify with the older brother. But I wasn't supposed to go into the story to find which one of them I looked the most like. I was supposed to go into the story to see how I saw the Father incorrectly. Because I looked at the Father through the lens of justice instead of looking at the Father through the lens of mercy. But once I see that the Father's seat on the porch waiting for the Son is a mercy seat, it then causes me to be able to see that the Son did not get the robe based on the Father's commitment to justice. The Son got the robe based on the Father's commitment to mercy. And what I saw through the lens of righteousness that I've never seen ever before is that I've had the wrong definition of what it means to be lost. Luke 15, none of them are issues of ownership. The sheep is lost, but still belongs to the shepherd. The coin is lost, but still belongs to the woman. The son is lost, but still belongs to the Father. In the kingdom, being lost is not about heaven or hell. It's about home or homelessness. These three things were lost because they were displaced. What does it really mean to get the lost saved? Get them to repeat the prayer so that when they die, they'll go to heaven. How did we even get there? If the goal of ministry is get people to repeat the prayer, the ministry of Jesus is 100% failure because he never led one person to repeat the prayer. Matter of fact, there's no evidence in any of the epistles that any apostolic leader ever led any individual to repeat a prayer so that when they died, they would not go to heaven. It was to take displaced coins and displaced sheep and displaced sons and show them the way home. I was saved. I was going to heaven if I died and miserable. Going to heaven if I died and on the verge of falling into sin continually. Going to heaven when I died and tormented by the pressure and the stress of meeting the expectation of people. I did not need to repeat a prayer so that I would be okay when I died. I needed to find home while I was still alive. And you know what the scripture says? He's alive, but he's dead because he's not home. He still belongs to the Father, but he's as good as dead because he's misplaced. The woman still owns the coin, but the coin cannot find where it belongs until the coin finds its way back into the possession of the one designed to own it. See, you are not designed to have a disconnected relationship. You're designed to be in the presence of the one you belong to. The sheep is of the same value if the sheep ends up in another fold. The coin is worth the same amount even if the woman never finds it. The son can operate in the same strength. He can operate in the same gift. He can operate in the same mental capacities if he never finds his way home. The gospel of the kingdom is not about you making sure you don't go to hell. The gospel of the kingdom is making sure you don't spend one more miserable day away from home. You can just go through this on your own. Maybe this afternoon when you get home, in the morning when you get up. Go through this and see how many times the word home is used. Whew. Go through this and see how many times the word home is used. It's what the father tells the older brother. He said, this son of ours, he was dead, but he's home. Luke 15 is not an issue of ownership, but lost. Not because they had not been saved, but lost because they had been displaced. The sheep still belonged to the shepherd, the coin still belonged to the woman, and the son still belonged to the father. That son, and I'm just going to focus on him. I feel like I've got stuff on all three storylines, but for the sake of time, I want to focus on this one son. This son is about to learn the ways of imputed righteousness. And that is not you did a doggone good job of taking care of your robe, but I'm going to give you mine. You soiled your robe, and by way of your soiled robe, you believe the best you would ever have is be an employee. That's literally, and it's the best word. When the son is rehearsing his speech, Father, I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called one of your sons. Just make me one of your hired servants. In essence, he's saying, I was a son here at one time, but I soiled my robe and I wasted everything you gave me. And because I soiled my robe and wasted everything you gave me, I'm asking now for employee status. And that is what happened to many of us that have led within the church, is because we blew it, because we fell short, because we were disappointed, because we went through extreme storms and struggle and betrayal. And I'm telling you, in the day of my most difficult season, the struggle, the propensity, the temptation was to simply become an employee. I remember I had a encounter with the Lord when I was away in Texas, and the Lord took me back to a spot. I was in Yosemite Valley in Yosemite National Park, camping there some years ago, back when I used to sleep on the ground. And I was camping in Yosemite Valley, and if you've ever been in the valley itself, at the base, you're looking up at Half Dome. There's a white chapel that's hidden in a meadow. That's a church that they have service on, I think, like Easter. And I walked into this church, and it's white wooden church with a big steeple. And if you're standing on the front porch of the church, you're just looking up at Half Dome. You're surrounded by the beauty that is Yosemite National Park. And I can remember being in that room and holding on to the pew by myself and weeping, because I knew the next day I had to get back on an airplane and fly back to speak to 10,000 people at a conference that was going to be sent around the world. And people were going to watch it in nations all over the world. And I began to hold on to that pew, and I began to weep. I asked God to get me out of this. I said, God, I would pastor this right here. If you would let me come in here every Sunday morning and just tell people about the kingdom, just tell them about your love and tell them about your mercy, I would pick this over what I'm about to go do any day. And it seemed impossible. It seemed impossible. I was a rat on a wheel in a cage. And escaping that seemed impossible. Not only did it seem impossible, I want you to listen to me, it seemed irresponsible for God to have given me a gift and a mantle for awakening that other people had identified, and then go hide out in some little church in Yosemite Valley. And then in the moment this time, when I dared to let Yahweh take me back in that church, he said, I heard your heart that day. And he said, now step out on the porch and don't look at Half Dome, look to the left and right. And I stepped out onto that porch in this vision, and I saw lines of people coming from every different direction. And in that moment, I knew this was my Yosemite Valley. That Yahweh had made a way of escape. You know what I always say? God will not tempt you above that you are able to bear, but he will, with the temptation, make a way of escape. The temptation is not always about sin. Sometimes the greatest temptation is success. The most seductive voice I've ever had in my life was not one of immorality. It was one of success. You can identify the seductive voice of immorality, but can you identify the 10,000 times more seductive voice of ambition? You would waste what God put on your life to go stand in some little white church in the middle of nowhere and just share the gospel of the kingdom? Yes. Because when I was lost was not when I hadn't repeated the prayer. When I was lost is not when I was on my way to hell. While I was far from hell and on my way to heaven, I was lost because I was displaced from the place that I was designed to identify as home. This is the third year in a row that I've gone away in the fall to be with Yahweh to ask him about what's next, and he would not whisper a word to me. What is next is more of what has been. It's not about moving from this thing to the next thing. It's about saying yes again to the one thing. An inch deep and a mile wide. An inch wide and a mile deep. If the purpose of revival is get people saved, then we're not doing a really good job. If the purpose of revival is get, in the religious sense, lost people saved, then we need to step up our game. But what if the purpose of revival is to get lost people saved? And Yahweh's trying to change our definition of what it means to be lost, so he can change our definition of what it means to be saved, so he can show us that what he really designed for us all along was to find the place where we belong. like a surface scratcher there. But this feels so weighty today, I don't even think I want to go any further. I pulled up in my driveway after being gone for a couple of weeks, and I rested my head on my steering wheel and I wept. I have some favorite places. The big, open, vast, massive ranch country of Texas that I just came from has always been one of those places. The shores of Wailea and Maui is one of my places. I mentioned Yosemite, Yellowstone. Those are places I love. I love the Smoky Mountains, as redneck and filled with fudged and airbrushed t-shirts as it is. I love the Smoky Mountains. I love the shores of the Caribbean, those islands. Yahweh's spoken some supreme things to me, but I can say beyond a doubt that if you let me relocate to any place on the globe, I'd like to go right back where I belong. And I don't know if this is ministering to you today or it's just something I had to say. You can be of great value on your way to heaven and very, very, very lost. You can be of great value and absolutely on your way to heaven and be very, very, very lost. You can be of great value doing amazing things for the kingdom of God and be very, very, very lost. How will you know then whether you've been found? You won't have to ask me that question. I sat with a group of leaders some time ago, and we were in revival was breaking out, and we were all over the panhandle of Florida and back and forth with Tennessee, and things were happening. God was moving. And I kept using the phrase revival, and someone asked me, what do you mean when you say revival? I said, you'll know when you don't have to ask me what I mean when I say revival. If you have to ask, what do I mean when I say revival, then you don't know revival. Because once you begin to experience this overwhelming sense of I can't play the guitar without my tears, and I can't walk down my driveway without erupting in thanksgiving with a heart that is filled to overflow, that the reality is now greater than the dream. The reality is functionally, quantitatively greater than the dream ever was. So now you're dreaming in terms of, well, then I might as well dream for things that are completely outlandish because you already surpassed the bar of the original dream. I can remember I probably spent more time this last 2 weeks thanking God for Tammy than I did for anything else. And if you were married to Tammy, you'd spend that much time thanking God for Tammy too. That's not like preacher talk. That's for real in our home, in our hearts, in our lives. And I was thanking God over and over for Tammy, and Yahweh brought me back to getting saved. I got saved, there's the term. December 12th, 1986, about 32 years ago. This year will be 33 years ago. And I can remember as a 12-year-old boy walking the aisleway between the plastic chairs in the youth room and asking God to give me the greatest marriage anybody had ever had in the world. That's what you pray when you're 12. And get me in the NFL, God. You know, it's stuff you pray when you're 12. God, one time I want to rope a steer at the National Finals Rodeo, you know, and give me the greatest marriage anybody's ever had in the history of the world. And my reality is greater than that dream. Are you kidding me? My reality is greater than that dream because I didn't have the idea. I didn't have a witness of possibility. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, now, what am I going to permit my boys to dream that have been able to be the witness of a pattern? What if the definition of greatness continues to change as Yahweh lets us into the next dimension of his definition of how he designed us to be functioning in a place called home? And I want to say this to you, and this is not to ensure that I'm not being self-serving. This is by way of the word of the Lord. If this ain't working for you, I hope you find where home is. I'm not trying to keep you here. But I'm telling you, could this not be working for you because you failed to let this become a home? Because I struggled with that. I wanted to be faithful in a season till the Lord let me go be where I wanted to go be. And there ain't nowhere that I wanted to go be that can begin to compare to what I feel when I walk through that trail in those woods and walk in this room full of sons that are here for one reason, not to be heard, not to be seen, not to be promoted. They're here because they want to burn the way they want a place of permission to release an expression that's equal to their story and their hunger. Hear the sound coming out of this place and look around this room. I'm blown away at what Yahweh has given us. And I've got there's so many things I felt like I heard from the Lord that I can't wait to teach you, but I refuse to muddy the waters of this today. And I want to conclude, and I actually do think I want you guys to go get on your instruments. We don't do that a whole lot anymore, do we? Then I'm going to tell them to bow their head and close their eyes, and on the count of 3, raise your hands. I was so good at that, you don't even know. I get myself saved like twice a month. I was an altar call having king. And Mother Teresa got saved twice in my meetings. I wanted to deal a lot with the older brother today, but I don't think he's worth it. Not in light of this. This is about Dad trying to get you home. This is about Dad trying to get you home. Come on. This isn't about who gets offended when you make it there and who judges you when you make it there and who thinks you joined a cult because you made it there. This is about you trying to get home. This is about you trying to find where you belong because you're tired of being valuable but of no use because you're independent. Come on, you have extreme value, but you're of no use because you're not in the house you're supposed to be in. You're not in the hand you're supposed to be in. And listen, you're not being carried on the set of shoulders you're supposed to be carried on. Watch what happens in the story. The sheep is picked up by the shepherd. And he says, this is how I keep you from wandering away. I yoke you to myself. I bring you into a degree of oneness where you're no longer even in charge of where your feet go. You want to stop straying off the path? Surrender to the hand of the shepherd that places you on his shoulders and wears you like his own personal shawl. That coin that may have been nebulously laid around the room until it was lost was then put back in the hand of the one that it was intended to belong to. And in that hand, that coin was now being held in such a way that it was no longer susceptible to disconnection. Come on, you can be held in the grips of the one you're designed to belong to in such a way that you are never again susceptible to disconnection. How many times have we preached it, and I hope we do for 10,000 years to come, of that boy with that downcast look heading down that road toward that father's house and then seeing that old man run. Old church used to sing a song that said, mercy came running like a prisoner set free. Past all my shame and to the point of my need. Come on, mercy came running like a prisoner set free, past all my shame and to the point of my need. You want a cure for wandering? Taste the arms of the Father instead of the inheritance. You can get the blessing of the Father. You can get the increase of the Father. You can get the prosperity that comes from the Father. You can get the inheritance that comes from the Father. And none of that will cure you from wandering. But one time when He takes your soiled robe into His arms, it cures you from every want to wander again. First thing He does is He embraces him. He welcomes him home. He starts to wipe the shame off of him by way of embrace. Could it be that many are never able to escape the shame of their past because they've not found an environment where they can experience the grips of the Father's embrace? The grips of the Father's embrace will heal something 10,000 sermons on being shame-free never will. So I want to create an environment for people to have an encounter. Not hear a sermon, not hear a typology, not to hear doctrine, but to hear permission for encounter, where an embrace begins to deal with every shameful thought pattern I've been in for years and years and years. He fixed me with a hug, not a sermon. Come on, he fixed me with a hug, not a sermon. All the sermon is there to do is to provoke you to come into greater contact with the encounter that generates the hug. The hug is the cure for the wanderings. Come on, don't hear doctrine on grace. Feel the embrace of grace. Don't know. Come on, I hear the tears beginning to flow in here today. Don't just hear a message on mercy. Know what the arms of mercy feels like. Don't make mercy a doctrine. Hear me, don't make mercy a doctrine. Mercy is a man. Mercy's name is Jesus. Mercy's name is I took all of the pain so you could have all of the life that you were designed for. Son of God and Son of Man, standing there with the arms filled with mercy, saying, I'm the reason you get to come back home. And in that embrace, the Father thought of two things quickly. He thought of two things quickly. First, go get me a robe. Because there's one cure to identify what's on you right now. And that is to experience what I designed to be on you all along. So go get me a robe, which represents in Scripture 100% of the time righteousness. 100% of the time I've been on a robe study. Robe represents righteousness. It represents royal rulership in the earth by way of the stance called uprightness. He says, go get me a robe. If you studied it a little further, it's even in the Passion Translation. The Father says, go get him my robe. Because I didn't intend for you to manage yours well. Everything you went through that you thought was driving you away from my presence was really being used to invite you in, because there would have always been a strut about you if you'd kept your own robe clean. So I taught you that your righteousness was as filthy rags, and what you went through was to create in you a degree of value and appreciation for something imputed, not earned. The Father said, go get him my robe. Go, don't, go get him my robe. Go get him one that belongs to a father. Oh man. I feel like I'm scratching a surface on something this morning to the point I don't really even know how to process what I'm feeling, to be honest with you. Maybe I've been too cautious in some of these statements, and maybe that's been a pride of a false humility in me. But I'm telling you, what you really need is a father. Home is no home where there's no dad. Home is not a home where there's not a father. If the only father picture you have is him mad, and the only father picture you have is him frustrated, and the only father picture you have is him disappointed, then I dare you to dive back in this story and find one shred of that in this father represented to that religious spirit that was being spoken to in this narrative. No, that the mad dad's not in there. The disappointed dad is not in there. The frustrated dad is not in there. Do you know what dad is in there? The one who said, I knew this day was coming and I'm not going to leave you naked. I knew this day was coming and I'm not going to leave you soiled. I knew this day was coming, so I put one robe right over there in the closet and I marked it and said, the day he comes home, I'm giving him the best robe that anybody has in the house. I need this moved out of the way super fast, just quick as we can. I feel this. I feel this. I feel this. I feel this. It's a re-identification coming. That's what's happening right now. You're being re-identified. You see yourself as soiled. You worship like you're soiled. You see yourself as failing to keep your own robe clean. And the goal of the gospel all along was not you keep your robe clean. The goal of the gospel was you say yes when he takes a robe off of the closet and says, I've been saving this one that has belonged to me. If you need to get down here, I want you to run. I want you to come. Don't waste any time. Come home. Come home. Come home. Come home. Come home. want you to feel the weight of the robe coming on you right now. Feel the weight of Abba's robe coming on you right now. Come on, would you dare to feel the weight of Abba's robe come on you right now? Come on, Daddy saved this one for you. Daddy marked this one special for you. Nothing fits me like Daddy's robe. Come on, nothing fits me like Daddy's robe.